Welcome back to the channel. So in today's video we're talking settings for the brand new Call of Duty Black Ops 6 game on PS5. We'll be covering the most important settings for your controller, such as dead zone, sensitivities, plus also how to make the world look more vibrant and other important graphic settings that will help everything look great. So whether you're a beginner or just looking to brush up on the new settings the game has to offer, you're certainly in the right place. Without any further ado, let's get into it. Head over to the settings menu, and the first ones we're going to talk about are controller. Firstly, have a play about with the button layouts. You'll likely start off on the default settings, but I've started using tactical recently and I absolutely love it. It suits my play style. I know another popular one is the L1 jumper or the bumper jumper tactical one, which helps you jump shot in gunfights without using X. You can use L1 instead, and therefore you don't have to take your thumb off the analog stick. So on sensitivity then, if you're new to the game, what I do recommend is that you start off pretty low, so maybe a 3 or a 4, and as you get more accustomed to the game and used to the pace, you can start increasing this when you feel like your aim's being held back or you can't quite snap onto targets frequently. That's when you know it's time to increase your sensitivity. Equally at the same time, you will get to a point where the sensitivity will be too much where you're overshooting targets. That's when you know that you need to drop it back down, and eventually you'll find a happy medium. Controller vibration and trigger effects, just have them off. There's no need to have these on in a multiplayer game just because it'll end up distracting you. So when you're shooting a target, it'll vibrate or the triggers will not pull quite right as they should because you got those triggers effect on. So just turn them off, no need to have them on. And that then brings us on to dead zones, which is actually one of the most important settings in the game. For those of you that don't know what dead zones are, it's essentially to stop you getting stick drift, that if you're not putting any inputs at all into the joystick and your character's sort of like doing this, or you're moving slightly left or right, that means your dead zones are incorrectly calibrated, and that's what they put these settings in the game for, to essentially stop those movements if you don't want them, of course. They've also put a little tool in here this year to help you collaborate it without you going into a game and doing it. If you're getting kind of movements like this or that, what you want to do is go on your left and right stick and essentially increase it by 1, turn that back on and see if you're still getting any movements. If you are, then again go back in here, increase it by another 1, and so forth until you finally get to the stage where when you go on test it is literally dead still. Another thing to consider as well is you might have seen my settings here at 85, and that's just because, as you can see from the red circle, it means I don't have to push my left analog stick to move the character or get him to sprint as much as I would usually have to with it being set at sort of like 100. So 85 I found works perfectly for me. With your L2 and R2 button dead zones, again, that's the same principle. Okay then, on to the aiming settings. In regard to sensitivity multipliers, I wouldn't recommend changing any of these. I keep all mine at 1, and that's just to build muscle memory, so there's no different aiming sensitivities between hip fire aim and also aim down sight, although I do know some people like to adjust the ADS sensitivity multiplier, which applies it across all weapons. If you feel like you need a slightly finer aim and a slowed down aim, for example when you are using a sniper or aiming down sights, then feel free to maybe adjust this down slightly, but my recommendation is to keep it at 1 because it keeps everything 1-to-1 then with your main sensitivity, and it builds that muscle memory. Looking version is standard, and in terms of the advanced settings, again, keep all those standard. And the other one to mention here is the aim response curve type. Dynamic is probably the most popular that most people use, and that's just because it enables you to look around quickly, aim quickly when you want to, but when you are trying to do those finer movements, for example when you're sniping or you're trying to reach a long distance target, the dynamic curve actually slows that down slightly, so it kind of gives you the best of both worlds. When you're pushing that analog stick all the way, it will give you a quicker movement circle. When you're actually trying to fine aim, it actually slows it down for you. So dynamic seems to work really well, and that's the one that I prefer. However, a lot of people do also use linear, and that's basically just a 1-to-1 map. So if you push the analog stick by 20%, that's exactly what it's going to do on the screen for you. It's going to move your character model or your aiming by 20% exactly. With linear, you probably only want to use this option generally if you are extremely good with your aiming on joysticks. Otherwise, I would stick to dynamic. In terms of the aim response curve slope scale, again, this can reduce the effects that you find in those curves. So if you wanted the dynamic curve to be a little bit dialed down compared to what it is as default, then of course you can reduce the effects of that, and that's what this setting's all about there. I keep it at 1 just as standard, as I like to have the full effect of what the dynamic curve offers. And custom sensitivity per zoom, again, just keep all that at 1 just for building muscle memory. I wouldn't get too much into customizing these, as if you start having different sensitivities for different zooms, it's going to be very difficult to build that muscle memory that you need in this game. Target aim assist, obviously you want on, and then motion sensor behaviors, not relevant unless you're using gyro, so I won't be covering that in this video. So on to movements then. The tactical sprint assist is one that I have on, and it just means as soon as you press that analog stick, you're going to sprint, or tactical sprint at least, which is definitely my preferred gameplay style. I like to be moving around the map very quickly and sprinting while I can, rather than absolutely having to bash the controller every time that I want to sprint. And you want to make sure that the sprint assist delay is down at 0, so as soon as you push that analog stick, you're going into tactical sprint. Because if you put the delay on, what it actually then does is, so let's just put it on here, let's say push it all the way to 700, it starts off walking then sprint, starts off walking then sprint. So you don't want that delay, you just want it to do instantly the tactical sprint. And again, sprint assist sideways and backwards, I have those just turned on. Mantle assist, turn that off. You don't want your character mantling when you're near low objects, when you're trying to reload or duck out of cover. It's just going to cause a right headache and become frustrating, so make sure you turn that off. That's the same with crouch assist as well. With corner slice, I would have that off, and that's just because when it's on, I'll show you what it does. Once you approach a corner, it starts to peek around that corner like that. And if you after something cinematic, then fine, have it, but it won't actually affect how far you can aim. It just has the effect of making you look like you're peering around a corner, as it would do in a cinematic sort of style. I don't think it really has a place in a multiplayer game. Certainly if you're playing the campaign, then maybe have that on just for the cinematic effects, but I would have that off personally. The slide behaviour, this always works best for me. The tap to slide, it's got a little menu on the right hand side just telling you what each does, but for me, tapping the R3 button on my settings to slide is definitely the best way to go. And also to dive, I can do it very quickly just with the current settings by holding the R3 button. And obviously in this game you can dive and shoot at the same time, so if you want to do that sort of thing, then the settings that I've got work perfectly well. Automatic airborne mantle I've just had on, that'll be more for Warzone in general. Sprint restore I've got on. Slide maintain sprint, I have that on, so if you do slide it will just keep you sprinting straight after you've performed that action. Parachute behaviour I just have off here, and that'll be for Warzone really once that actually launches, but just gives you full control over the parachute for Warzone. Mantle cancels reloads. I mean, you won't be mantling anyway, as we've turned that off earlier. And then in terms of movement behaviours, these are my settings for those here, which I think work really well. In terms of the sprinting door bash, I think that's worth having on, because while you're sprinting you're going to go flying through a door anyway, so it's worth bashing it open. Vehicle settings I'm not going to go through in this guide because I don't generally use vehicles. Aim down sight behaviour is obviously hold rather than tap. You certainly don't want to be using the toggle because you're using sort of like 3 or 4 different button movements just to aim down sight. You certainly want to be holding to aim down sight. Armor plate behaviour, apply all, and that is obviously a Warzone setting. C4, detonate all of them at once. And then moving on to the advanced settings, I'm just going to mention a couple on here. So in terms of the interact and reload behaviour, you want this as tap to interact. That's the sort of classic style for playing Warzone, because when you're looting boxes you just want to be tapping them dead quick, and then hold to reload. So certainly have that on tap to interact, and that'll be more for Warzone. It's not really relevant for multiplayer as it stands. And then the sprint cancels reload you still want off, as if you are sprinting but you need to reload your gun, you want to be able to fully reload that gun without you moving forwards automatically and sprinting and then cancelling it. So moving on to the graphics settings then. So firstly, if you have 120Hz available, you certainly want to be running 120Hz, as that'll give you up to 120 frames per second. Obviously you will need a TV that supports this, or a gaming monitor that supports that refresh rate. If you're just playing off a standard TV or a standard monitor, then you'll probably find that you can't select this. Gamma and brightness, just follow the guide. I've always had it at 53. I just prefer the game a little bit brighter, but again, this is personal preference. And I have eco mode off because when I'm gaming I want to make sure that I get the best performance out of my graphics. In terms of quality, you want all these things off here, such as weapon motion blur, world motion blur. They're just things that distract you from the game. You don't really need it in a multiplayer environment, but if you're playing campaign, maybe turn those on, but you certainly don't need them for multiplayer, as it will just distract you from shooting targets basically. Fidelity cast, that's just a sharpener. It's worth probably cranking up to anywhere between 80 and 100. I've got mine at 85 because I do like it not to be super sharp, but 85 I find is the right balance for me, but that'll depend on your monitor or TV as well, but certainly have that on, as it will make a difference to you seeing targets in the distance. And then on-demand text streaming, you want to make sure that is down to a minimal, as all it will do if you're on optimized, it will download stuff while you're playing the game, and that opens you up to lagging and rubber banding, etc. So make sure you have that down to minimal. So onto the view settings then. Motion reduction preset you just want to turn off, just because we have just manually adjusted those, so you don't need to do it as well. In regards to field of view, you'll see a lot of streamers playing off the maximum, which is 120, which I don't actually think is the best one to play off, and it's for this reason. So if I just take a look at those targets here, look, those plant pots over there, look at what the distance is away on the screen at the moment. If I were to increase my sensitivity and put it all the way to 120, look how far away they look now. I've not moved the character model, but they look a lot further away. And this is the problem with playing on 120, is that everything in the distance will look a lot further. So if you're playing on 1440p or 4K, it might be easier to see those targets in the distance, but if you're playing on 1080p, generally everything's just going to look so much further away, and that's why I don't think it's worth playing on 120. So that's why generally I play off the 108, just because once I put that down to 108, those targets look a lot closer and you'll be able to see more at distance, which is particularly relevant for Warzone. Another thing that I mentioned at the start of the video is that there's something that's very important that a lot of people miss out when they're saying which field of view to go with and which sensitivity to go with, and that is that the higher your field of view, the higher your perceived sensitivity will be actually playing the game. So let me give you an example. If I was to put this all the way down to 76, right, I'm on the same sensitivity, look how slow that makes it look and feel. Yeah, whereas if I put it up to my normal field of view, which is 108, you perceive sensitivities a lot more just because you can see a lot more. So it's about balancing your sensitivity with the field of view that you want to play, and just bearing in mind that once you do nudge that field of view up, your perceived sensitivity will be a little bit higher than what you're used to if you're playing a lower field of view. ADS field of view you definitely want wide, just means you can see more. Same with your weapon field of view, you just want that on wide. Third person field of view, keep that at the maximum. Vehicle field of view, as I said, I don't generally go in vehicles, but if I was, I'll have that on wide. And then camera movement, you just want that the least. You don't want cinematic settings again on multiplayer. You just want all the movements that are kind of for the cinematic experience to be as low as possible. And then this obviously you can change as your personal preference. And for those who don't like the big white flashes when you get flashbanged, you can actually invert that to a black screen. Video settings then. So I have my master game volume at 100. Music down low, just because I find it annoying and distracting. It's not needed. Dialogue volume the same, so when you're in game and it's announcing things like an airstrike coming in, I have that half of what it would usually be, because I find that it would distract attention away from hearing things like footsteps. Effects volume is at 100 and the cinematic music down at 6. I found that the best one at the moment is Sucker Punch in terms of the audio mix, and that's just because generally you can hear footsteps a little bit more and higher pitch sounds a little bit better as well. But again, this is something to have a play about with your settings in your headphones, so maybe try all of them. I used to use the headphone setting, but this one seems to be pretty good for hearing footsteps for sure, so give that a go, but also give the rest of them a go for your headphones and where you're actually listening to the game on. Okay, on to the interface settings then. So these are sort of personal preference, so up to you what you guys want to select for that. Mostly I have them off. In terms of telemetry, then that's what you can see at the top left of the screen there, the latency of packet loss. I always have those on because it means you can instantly see if there's a problem with the server, for example, so I do recommend turning those on, and you can even turn a little clock on if you wanted to as well. On to readability, subtitles, again personal preference, and all this stuff is as well. In terms of colour customization, I have all this as standard. Now the only thing that I do change is colour filter 2. I find is the best one. It just makes everything look a lot more vibrant, both in the menus and also in the game, compared to sort of like the other filters. So certainly go with filter 2. I think that'll make a a really good difference visually for you without having to adjust any individual settings on your monitor, for example. I have that set to both, not just the world or interface, so both of them I like to see a little bit more vibrant. And in terms of the gameplay HUD, a couple of things to mention on here. Minimap shape, you want square, you just get more of what's around you at the top left of your screen there, rather than the standard circle, so make sure you've got that on the square setting. Minimap rotations on, obviously, radar off, and then the compass type, I don't like it at the minimap, I like it horizontal at the top centre of the screen. So if you slip to the minimap, you can see there just in the top left that the compass is there and it's not very visible. So generally I like to have that at horizontal, so at the top of the screen there you can see that if you're making call outs to your buddies in Warzone and say, oh, you're southeast, it's easy to see and easy to relay over the comms where potential enemies are, etc. And then the other things on the HD are all personal preference generally, so feel free to have a play back with these and see which ones that you want to go with. You can change your visibility for stuff as well, so if you get all these prompts on the screen that you find really irritating, you can reduce their opacity, so up to you guys if you want to do that. Alright, so that's it for today, and hopefully these tips have helped you feel more confident about how to set up your settings on this game, and please consider subscribing if this has been helpful.